This is your captain speaking.
My name is Herb Kelleher, and I was born on March 12, 1931, in New Jersey. The greatest business decision I ever made, if you look at it on kind of a collective basis, was the move to Texas. That was number one. Because that led to lots of entrepreneurial opportunities, not only Southwest Airlines, but in other areas as well. And I really enjoyed that, really enjoyed the spirit of it. It was really fun getting things started. It's always hard, and kind of fun, you know, being in the ring, punching it out. And so I'd say that that was the biggest business decision I ever made, because it was the birth of everything else. My law office was right across the street from the St. Anthony Hotel, and I spent a good bit of time at the St. Anthony Club. And so we were just diddling and fooling around, discussing the idea. And so it's true in that sense. Rollin had mentioned it to me previously, that John Parker from the Alamo Bank had said, why don't you set up an airline in Texas? He had mentioned it to me previously, so on the napkin occasion, we had really gotten together to discuss, you know, whether to proceed or not. And I was very skeptical at first, until I looked at PSA in California and said, hey, they're doing okay as an intrastate carrier. And Texas is ideal for it because it's big, it has major metropolitan areas, and they're far enough apart that people would choose flying, you know, if they could afford it. And so we got started on that, and the other carriers were not very welcoming. And they tried to prevent us from getting into business. I had to litigate for 4.5 years with them just to get the right to fly our first flight, and had to go to the Texas Supreme Court for emergency relief 19 hours before the first departure. The biggest at that time were Braniff, Texas International, and Continental Airlines. And the three of them pursued us like the hounds of the Baskerville for, as I said, more than 4 years. And later on, when we decided to stay at Love Field in downtown Dallas instead of moving to the outlying DFW airport, that involved all the carriers out there, and 2 more trips to the United States Supreme Court, because they wanted to kick us out of Love Field. And that would have been the end of us if they had been successful.
We'll be experiencing some turbulence. Shouldn't last more than 15 or 20 minutes.
When I filed my third brief in the United States Supreme Court on behalf of Southwest Airlines, the assistant clerk who was receiving it for the court looked down and said, at the caption, said, are they picking on your little Texas airline again? I felt pretty good about the outcome. We weren't anticipating, you know, 4.5 years of litigation. We ran out of money in 1969, and the board was prepared to shut the company down, which is very understandable since you have no cash. And I offered to work for nothing and pay the cost of continuing the litigation out of my own pocket, to be reimbursed later if the airline ever became operational. So we did that for a couple of years, where I just took on all the cost burdens. And of course, I did get reimbursed after the airline got into the air. When we started to work on getting Southwest into the air, about 85% of adults in the United States had never flown on a single commercial flight. Now, the reason for that was that the fares were so high, you know, under CAB regulation of federal carriers. And Southwest Airlines was an intrastate carrier. The CAB wasn't admitting any new fellows into their club. It was an intrastate carrier, and we could do whatever we wanted to, the way that we wanted to. And basically, we decided that we were going to do everything differently from the traditional old line carriers. And if they were doing it, it was something we probably wouldn't do, and worked out very well. And actually, we democratized the skies. Roy Spence from our ad agency came up with that. But we put all those people who had never flown into the air. And the DOT, Department of Transportation, did 2 studies. Number one said that Southwest provided 90% of all the low-fare service in the United States of America. Number 2, they call it the Southwest effect, because when we went into a new city, suddenly the number of passengers in a city pair market, between 2 cities, would increase in a year by 150, 200%, one case 800%. And so they call that the Southwest effect, putting people into the air. And of course, we loved it because you could do so much good for people while doing well for yourself with the pattern that we were using. I mean, it wasn't just businesses. A lot of businesses said, and I've got records, restaurant saying we expand our chain as Southwest expands our system. Consultants saying, in Dallas saying we can now bid for jobs in Houston as a consultant because the air transportation won't be so expensive that it disqualifies us from being competitive. The grandmother that says, if it weren't for you, I would not have been able to afford to go see my grandson, graduate from naval training in San Diego. The divorced parents had said, thank goodness for you, because now we can ship our children back and forth and see them more often. All that kind of thing, not just business, but personal, that is so important to people. Attending family reunions, going to funerals, that sort of thing. So we really liberated the American people to fly. I mean, how can this airline charge fares that low and still be profitable? Well, we were very efficient, very, very efficient. Our people were very much wed to our cause. They worked furiously to make us successful. And our costs were really lower basically through productivity. And the productivity, again, emanated from having the kind of system that the other carriers did not. So we could be a lot more productive with our airplanes and people than they could by the way that we operated. And it's really funny because, well, it was funny to me. I would go to Congress where the other airlines were trying to put us under, through manipulating the government. And every congressman assumed that we were a non-union airline because of our low cost. And they would look at me like I was a lying monkey, when I'd say, no, we're the most heavily unionized airline in the United States of America by percentage. And they just couldn't understand that. But we welcomed the unions. We didn't treat them as adversaries. We treated them as friends and partners, and they took a long-headed vision of the future. Well, actually, my wife, Joan, was responsible for that. She introduced me to Texas, and I spent a lot of time in Texas while I was working for the New Jersey Supreme Court, and fell in love with the state. Joan never urged me to leave New Jersey and go to Texas. But I came home one evening, and I've always had kind of an entrepreneurial bent. And I said to Joan, I think I want to move to Texas because I think there's more opportunity for an entrepreneur in Texas. And little tears started to course down her cheeks. And so we came to Texas. She was going to school in New London at Connecticut College, and I was going to Wesleyan University in Middletown, Connecticut, and we met on a blind date at a basketball game. Yeah, I was a lawyer, but I couldn't be admitted on motion to the Texas bar because New Jersey wouldn't admit any lawyers on motion. It was protecting itself from incursions from New York and Philadelphia, because it's right in the middle of the two. And so I had to take the Texas bar exam, and I had to wait 6 months in order to do that. And so my brother-in-law, Alfred Negley, who was more like a brother, he said, why don't you get involved in the John Connally campaign for governor? And it was kind of interesting because at that time, only about 4% of people in the state of Texas knew who John Connolly was. And they wore buttons saying, I was a 4%er. And of course, Governor Connolly won, and that was very good for San Antonio and for Texas as well. And he asked me to join him as part of his staff. And I told him, no, I can't do that because I just barely arrived in San Antonio, and I don't want all the people in San Antonio to think I'm just a carpetbagger. Well, then I decided that I'd take the bar exam. I hadn't had any time to prepare for it because of the Connolly campaign. And so I just went into it kind of cold, but I did okay. Came in second in the state. Well, I would say that my greatest characteristic is recognizing my own inadequacies and really looking to people who are smarter than I am to make up for my deficiencies. Well, I would say, number one, it's intense curiosity. Number two, it's hiring the right people and imbuing them with the right spirit, motivating them to really, I guess you might say, enlist in a cause instead of just a company. Like we had, a symbol of freedom as our signature line. Well, that was as much directed inside as outside to tell our people every day, when you throw a bag in a bin, when you take a reservations call, when you deal with the flight attendant on an airplane, when your flight attendant deals with customers on an airplane, you're serving a cause that's greater than the company. You're serving the American people and enabling them to do things they otherwise couldn't do that are very important to them. So it was inspirational in that respect. And also, we hired for attitude rather than skills because we figured if you have a bad attitude, you're going to poison the well, so to speak. And so we take people with less experience, less expertise, and great servants' hearts over somebody who had a more disciplined background. In other words, we didn't certificate people. We said, we want you for who you are, and when you get to Southwest Airlines, we want you to behave like who you are. We don't want automatons coming to work every day. We don't want people wearing masks when they're at work. So if you like to have fun, if you like to joke, do it. We had great trust in our people. And let me explain, for instance, give you an example. We thought our people should be given the flexibility to handle problems on the spot. In one of the stations in our cities, for instance, the stations in our cities. And so we said, we're going to do away with your manuals, big, thick, loose leaf manuals. And we just did guidelines for leaders, which was about 30 pages instead of 500 pages. And you know what the first sentence was? Guidelines for leaders. These are only guidelines. Feel free to break them in the interest of our customers. And our people did. They were somewhat apprehensive at first. They couldn't believe that we really wanted this type of world. But after 6 months, a year, they were into it big time. If anybody submitted an idea, and they were always free to submit it to me, submit it to Colleen Barrett, submit it to anybody they wanted to get the attention that it required. And our rule was that we had to have an answer in a week. And it could be, we think there's promise in this, so we're going to be testing it, but they had to have an answer within a week, honoring them for taking the trouble. And if we turned down an idea, we gave very explicit reasons why. And you know what the thinking was? we don't want them to think that we're just throwing ideas out, discarding them, saying they're worthless, because once you do that, the person will never give you another idea. So we want to keep that freshet of ideas coming. Well, I'll tell you, it's hard to sum it up succinctly, but I would say have an open mind, be curious, and be persistent when you have a good idea. And if you're an entrepreneur, you have to be optimistic by nature, I think. But you can't be too optimistic in the sense that in helping other companies, kids in many cases, get started, I've told them now, yes, you have a great idea, but let me explain something to you. Just because you have a great idea doesn't mean that silver dollars and gold dollars suddenly come pouring down on you from heaven, right? You've got to work on refining your idea. You've got to find out if there's a market for your idea. You've got to understand how you're going to publicize your idea. In other words, it's going to take some sweat, no matter how good it is. I fell in love with the city as soon as I got here, to tell you the truth. The people were very welcoming. I said it's the only city in the United States that I've been in where you go into a department store to buy something and you have a 5 or 10 minute chat, before you get your item, which I really enjoyed. And colorful, very colorful. San Antonio to me is an ideal place to live. And San Antonio has really, I think, permeated every aspect of my life since I came here.